All right, my friends, welcome once again to another episode here of the Red Delta Project podcast, simplifying fitness by observing the fundamental principles of modern human nature. I am joined here with my friend Mike D. We are talking today about simplifying the whole thing with a less is more kind of approach to using less but getting so much more out of it. And you know, this is a topic dear to my heart because I'm all about getting the most from the least. It's good for motivation. It's good for reducing stress and strain on mind, body, and lifestyle. And it helps us dive deep into what makes things more proficient instead of having a broad approach where we just kind of become a jack of all trades rather than a master of none. So, Mike, welcome once again to the RDP podcast. Happy to have you on here, man.
Thank you so much, man. Happy to be on. It's an honor.
Very good. Very good. So we're talking less is more sort of an approach. And this is kind of going a little bit in the wrong direction, or not the wrong direction, the opposite direction, where it seems like every time we turn on the internet or social media, there's so much stuff out there of like, oh, you need to have all of this and you need these supplements and you need this equipment and more and more and more. And I see people add, but we usually don't have that much attention on the power of subtraction and getting rid of the unnecessary or the things that are just eating up a lot of our resources and our attention that are more just distracting ourselves. Is this something you've been observing and practicing a lot in your own approaches or is this a kind of a recent thing for you?
Well, I'll definitely say, I mean, I think it's a struggle, honestly. I think a lot of us are faced with. I don't think some of us, maybe you're one of the rare people that can be immune to all the stuff that's coming in that's attractive to you. And so I certainly love trying out, new toys and new things or exploring new things, just methodologies that are out there. But I think the big thing at the end of the day was I always like kind of doing my own thing. Maybe a little private of a person, but also just, I would say intuitive isn't the word. I don't know the age difference between me and you, but I know we might discuss this when you were on, when I was talking with you earlier, that in those early 2000 years when a lot of that new stuff was coming out, even like progressive calisthenics, I mean, that was eye-opening to me. And then, we had Olympic lifting that was kind of like a fringe thing, and CrossFit was the ultimate apex of what was happening at the time, combining all these different things were coming around. So at a young age, I think I was always into like bodybuilding, that was it. But then when I started seeing other things that are out there, I always like doing things a little bit unique. So if something new came along, like a TRX or an apparatus, I was that person. And that was kind of my gimmick when I was still training full-time in gyms, was I'd have a hockey bag full of stuff. And I'd go in there and people like, well, how are you doing those things? And I just want to learn something new that no one else is doing. So I wouldn't know if I necessarily call myself a minimalist. I like trying things, but certainly I will subtract things that aren't working. And before I kind of go on a rant here, I think just yesterday, I'll make maybe this on my own channel about this. I had free access. I always have access to the gyms. I haven't gone back to the gym since 2020 when they closed them down. Having that first gym workout, I thought I'm gonna have all this equipment. This probably feel pretty good. I was surprised how much I didn't like it, all that equipment and how it felt. Because I think at this point, the stuff I started using more, I got really accustomed to that feel. Even if you're probably like yourself, a progressive calisthenic enthusiast, that feels good. But from the outside, well, how does that not feel better than like a machine that has all these options and bells and whistles? But I think you get so used to honing in what works for you in those movement patterns, those devices, that when I went to the gym, I was just shocked at how much I didn't like the equipment that was there. So if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it totally does, because we get used to the training methodologies that we just practice the most with. And I had a very similar experience when I had a home gym. I started off in my career with building home gyms, and everybody would come into the store saying, oh, we're sick of the gym and the gym sucks, so we're going to build a home gym. So for the first several years of my training career, it was all about, well, the gym is a terrible place to go, so home is where it's at. So I built my own home gym. And even then I had the mindset of I need more equipment and I need more gadgets and more toys, and I just add. And then I went to a gym one time just kind of on a whim. And I was like, oh my gosh, this place is great because there's everything here that I could ever want. So I started going to gyms, and it was all about more and bigger and fancier and how many machines can I possibly use in a workout. And now I've got a pull-up bar and a set of straps, and even that's more than I need most of the time. And it's funny how you just get honed in on the things that are working best for your body. And it's not so much that the other stuff is bad, but it's just you don't need it nearly as much. And you just would rather focus on the things that are just working the best for you. So I'm thinking that this approach of less is more, it's not so much a reduction in what you're using and how much you're doing. It's more of just figuring out, that 20% that's working the best for you and focusing on that, and not so much kicking the other stuff to the curb. It's just your attention naturally goes to what works best for you.
And I would say there's some paradigm breaking there too, because I think people, I was at the gym, I was observing, I'm not judging exactly what's going through their brains, but I could see the people doing they did the 4 sequences of chest exercises, they did one machine, they went to the incline, went to the decline, versus, well, let's just stay in one machine that just feels awesome and do enough necessary reps and sets that's necessary. And going back to your first point, I think it's maybe how we first started this discussion, the emails, I started getting some more toys in this gym, and you start realizing I can only have so much space. But then the idea of I felt like I had to include it when you're at the gym. That's the temptation. It's like, well, I got this really cool chest thing. Let's just try it. Even though in the past I would join gyms that this machine doesn't feel, if it doesn't feel good, I would not jump. I'm not going to stay with it. But even if there's a couple of things that do feel good, you're like, well, I want to make sure I squeeze that in. Versus if you got 3 or a couple things that feel good, even just exercises, just stick with those 3 things and just hammer those in and just stay with those things. But the thing I just started with, I think that giving yourself that mental permission of, I don't have to do 8 different chest exercises. I personally got over that years ago. But that goes with everything. I think even one of the things I said about for progress, as far as how I started to see my body really develop and grow, was give myself permission to do a little bit more or maybe a little bit less. Working out with somebody and realizing, this was at a young age, maybe my 19, 20 or something like that. But already working out for 3 years consistently, this person is doing a lot more. He's not stopping at 3 sets. He's doing more sets. So yeah, I could do more. And if I want to do more, do more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good attitude to have with this discussion, because as we started to talk about doing this podcast and this conversation, and I started thinking to myself, it's less is more kind of thing. It's well, not always. Sometimes more is more. Sometimes you do get more from doing a little bit more. And so having that approach where it's well, if you benefit from more, then that's a good thing. That you don't necessarily always get better results from reduction. I think more of what we're talking about here is the countering this attitude or this perspective of you've got to be adding on and you've got to keep increasing things, which, if I think about it, I think a lot of it's just driven by a lot of just FOMO and marketing tactics, because every time there's something new coming out, whether it's a new program or an approach, or even if someone gets on a YouTube video or a podcast and they're like, oh, dude, this new, 5x5 program I'm using is the best thing in the world. And suddenly you look at everything you're doing and you're like, all right, so am I missing out? And often when we add something in, we don't take anything out. So it just keeps getting more bloated and overweight as far as our attention goes. And we just wake up one day and we're like, how in the world can I fit all this in? Or a paralysis by analysis of, I've got 15 different exercises I need to do. Which ones are the best and which ones should I do? Because everybody thinks they're the greatest thing in the world. What do you do to kind of combat the FOMO and all of that sort of pressure to keep doing everything?
Well, it's weird, and this goes back to, because I can hear some people who maybe I got some gimmicky things on here for sure that I talk about, and some people get mad, well, you're either you're shilling for this thing or you're just my whole thing is I don't care what the training program is saying, what the methodology. I'm doing it really because, one, I think it's fun or interesting, and it's really giving off a stimulus. That's probably the biggest thing. If I'm doing something, it's this doesn't feel right, I'm just not going to do it. I don't care. Programming was something I never had that, and it's just maybe it could be to my own detriment. I don't think I've tried programs like Searcher, traditional strength training programs, strength lifting. That was probably a program I'd stick to, but I never was one where, and I didn't ever saw the allure of that. Well, there's this one program, I got to try it. I never cared about that. I was if it was a device or some tool, I gravitated more towards that, because to me, it's just the kid inside. At the end of the day, this is fun for me. If this was not fun, I wouldn't be doing it. So it's like a toy. It's I got this new toy, I want to try it. And some people might not want to hear that. They're well, how can you, that's not scientific. Or I was I don't care. At the end of the day, that's also the mental side. Maybe more is definitely bad for me. I'm doing too much volume, too much work. And I know there's days I'm doing too much, but that mental side of I like that, just doing an extra rep or just going to complete failure on something versus I know maybe I did one set would have been enough. So I think that was probably the biggest thing. I definitely have FOMO with like a device or something that cooler comes out, especially nowadays with this electronic digital stuff. I really think that is tempting. That stuff looks cool, and that goes back to feeling. I think too that trying some of the digital attention and weight really is unique. Especially yesterday, I went to the gym and trying that free motion. I had this expensive functional trainer on. The pulleys just didn't feel as good. I was like, that digital weight. I was thinking about how great that felt. So long and short of it is, I think I still have FOMO with tools because I like toys. As a kid, I always loved toys and action figures. That's probably, I never lost that probably. So, but the programming I didn't like because it was regimented, and I didn't like even workout partners. Like if someone says we got to do this, I'm like, kind of sucks. I just have fun, So.
Oh, I was always the same way too. Like I don't like working out too much with other people unless we're kind of doing a very playful approach to it. That's somewhat flexible. And I've always said, like, I can't stand doing other people's program. Like, I've got this program, you've got to do it. And I've done that several times, just kind of falling into it, like, oh, you've got to do this. And I'm like, all right, I'll give it a try. Then halfway through, like, half these exercises are not in alignment with my goals. Like, why the hell am I doing this? This is nothing why? Like, because someone told me to do it, I wouldn't be doing this. Why am I doing this? But I totally get what you're saying about all the toys and stuff. There's so many great things to play with out there because that's what I got my start in was equipment. So I always have a fascination with that. In fact, I just reviewed an electronic resistance machine that's now on Indiegogo, the Inodi Gym, the P1. And I brought it on just because it's like, this is going to be fun to play with. This is going to be a cool learning experience. And it's a wild machine. But what I've learned, the strength coach, Dan John.
Yeah.
So at the RKC that I attended that he taught one time, he had such a liberating perspective that I think really helps with this, where he was saying, like, everything that you have, most tools out there, you've got this really, really broad range of exercises and techniques. In that case, he was talking about the kettlebell. He's like, there's so many different things you can do with the kettlebell. There's so versatile and stuff. Same with the barbell, same with suspension straps and everything. It's like, but chances are very good you're going to get most of your benefit from just a handful of exercises, if that. So he's like, it's perfectly fine to have a couple kettlebells in the gym and be like, yeah, I do kettlebell swings and goblet squats 90% of the time. That's all I use these for. And he's like, yeah, you can do a lot more. But if that's all you need to do in order to accomplish your objectives and get what you want from it, that's fine. You don't need to make it the heart and soul of your training program unless you want to. And so giving yourself that permission of saying there's 20 million exercises with this device, but I'm really only getting most of my benefit from these 3 exercises is perfectly fine to say I'm just doing this, because you're not limiting yourself by not doing the other stuff. You're just maximizing the potential of those things you're getting the most out of.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I even think of just going back to just that one exercise and just doing it and doing it. I mean, I think of the squat as one where there was a period of a couple of years where I was just, that was my leg exercise, doing squat. And it was just, I would do a lot of, some days my favorite day was, it was Saturdays. I'd go in and I would do, it sounds stupid, but my legs were, why did I do the squats in the first place? That gets back to the why. I say it's with like students. It's like, if you can't answer that why question, say, yeah, I'm doing squats because I like the exercise, it feels good, I can talk range of motion stuff, etc. But I wanted my legs to be developed, and they were, growing, and I felt the way they were there. It's fine. So, point is, my legs were growing, everything was looking good, and I'm like, having fun and checking all the boxes. Now, objectively, was that probably the most scientific thing? No, because there's some days like it was fun for me. I'm just going to do 100 squats, at least 135 or 225 when I get to 100. And you kind of think, well, like, I sell myself short. I don't think so, because I think as long as you're doing those things and you're kind of working hard, you're going to progress. And you learn that right away when you get somebody who's never done that before, and they look at you like, how did you do? Like, they can't get through 3 sets. I guess that's incredible. Even though we know it's just like anything else in exercise, you're just, it's relatively easy to keep doing it consistently. But that alone just shows you that it's, at the end of the day, it's just kind of what you want to get out of it. And I think the simplicity is awesome for sure.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but one thing I've always noticed in my various physical disciplines I've practiced over the years is the people who tend to be just the leaders in their field, the ones who are really, really, really good at whatever it is. they tend to kind of specialize and just really master a handful of techniques. They're not doing 1,000,001 things. They'll supplement with a bunch of other stuff. But, oh, that guy over there's got, huge back and well-developed physique. Is like, yeah, like 80% of his workout is nothing but pull-ups, right? Or oh, that guy is so strong, is like he's deadlifting and he's doing overhead presses. And that's like, 60% of his program is just those two moves. And you watch him work it, and they're undoubtedly strong, but they're also just masters of that technique. So I think there's a lot to be said for developing the depth of understanding and the proficiency in a few things, which I guess that kind of goes along with what we were saying earlier. In one way, it's really simple because there's only a few techniques, but on the other hand, you're going really with a lot, because you could talk for hours about squats, Betty. If you were at a party and I'm like, talk to me about squats. What do I think about? What about programming? You could fill a book with nothing about techniques and stuff about squats, because you learn that so much more in depth.
Yeah, and I think it's also subtle too. Like if someone was a master, or just used barbells for strength training, or over the calisthenics, and you're watching it from a outsider's view, it's like, it looks like I'm just doing the same things they're doing, but like just the subtleties of what they're subtle things of like a range of motion, or they just maybe keep in a groove for something for a couple exercises. Everything's so subtle that I think for the casual viewer, it's hard to convey, especially in a video. They're like, "I'll just get to the point what you're trying to say." But it's also just, I can understand it takes time to really appreciate that, especially with the stuff I'm talking about too. To your point though about I was thinking, who is somebody that's I think of like a generalist, and definitely influenced me. And there wasn't too many negatives, but there was mostly positive. I was really into Paul. Paul Check.
Mm-hmm.
You heard of him? Yeah.
I mean, I've heard of him. I'm not too familiar with his work, but yeah.
He's. I definitely give him credit. I mean, if you look now, he's really into. He's gone way beyond exercise and strength conditioning. That was his initial thing, strength conditioning, but. What he coined was the whole the movement pattern system. He called it pile movement patterns at the time. So every exercise, he broke it down to like a squat, lunge, bend, twist, gait, and then other organizations have taken that same idea and applied it. He brought the Swiss ball, for better or for worse, or the Swiss ball exercise in the 90s. So people standing on Swiss balls was kind of him, but also the good stuff of Swiss balls. So. Yep. He was someone that was very much a generalist and was one of the gurus of like quote unquote functional training that got bastardized for sure. But I took that. I think if I didn't learn from him early on, I went to I was an official Czech practitioner in my younger age at Labs. And actually, you know the guy JP Sears, the famous YouTuber. Yeah, he was actually a coach. So before he was like YouTube famous, he was actually a coach at one of like the things, and kind of like the breeding or living example of the stuff he kind of parodies, like an ultra holistic guru type thing. So I don't know if they came out of that, but anyway, that's just a side tangent.
Probably. I've dabbled in a little bit of that myself, and it's real easy to do when you've been in that space for a while.
Yeah. So, but that was a school. I'm going on a rant here, but I guess that was a school of thought of functional training that I applied to everything that I think did influence my training for the better. Now, granted, I was doing some stupid stuff, like I was the one at the gym bouncing and stability balls and squatting, but that led to things like pistol squats and getting into progressive calisthenics and trying other wacky things that people are like, why are you doing that? Hanging out, suspension trainers were a big thing. You brought those to the gym, people thought you were just like wacky, like why you're hanging from these straps. I don't understand it. So there's a lot of things that were wacky initially, that kettlebells, foam rollers that now you see everywhere. So there's the thing is that I think that people need to remember too. I was having this discussion the other day, and we were talking about electric cars, and they were like, "Oh, this is this terrible." I like, look at this company, their car caught on fire, and this is such a stupid thing. It'll never work. I'm like, do you understand that nobody has a roadmap for innovation? Like, there's no clear crystal ball saying this is the way that we're going to bring about the next revolution in how we're exercising and eating and training. We're all just making it up and experimenting, and we're going to break a whole lot of stuff. And looking back now, it's like, okay, some of the functional training stuff and some of the stuff that, got really hyped up and everything. It's easy to look back and
say, oh, that was stupid and ridiculous, and I was standing on balls as well and everything. But the thing is that we don't know where things are going to go, where that next nugget of discovery is going to be. So we've got to do a lot of digging through the muck in order to just find those golden nuggets that's going to be like, wow, I just found this thing out, and it's going to be, and it's huge. It's wonderful. I wish I knew this 20 years ago. And so when we're looking at this stuff of, we expand, we add in the tools and we add in the exercise and we add in the methods. And that's great because it's the only way you can have the best chance of finding the good stuff. But then you got to filter it on down into, all right, we got these suspension straps or foam rollers or what. Okay, maybe like 80% of it's kind of superfluous, but what's that 10 or 15% that really has its value? So it's like this expand and contract kind of approach to things that allows us to really find the best of what's out there and what's coming for the innovation.
And I think that's the fun stuff too. I mean, I think people I think with even like just basic barbells and bodybuilding, I think that was the allure initially. It was something different and unique. No one knew anything about it. We take it for granted now. A lot of stuff is relatively kind of brand new. And I think part of that was just something different. Just we can do these things and what happens when you do them. And I think even with just a lot of the exercises that are out there now, I mean, even this thing I'm sitting on, it wasn't so much I was trying to make a point with like just using these total gym assignments, training type stuff. I had them earlier on, actually from Paul Check. He was the first one I actually knew about him from. But I was just shocked about just how much fun I was having versus in the gym when home gym stuff never stuck because it wasn't fun. It was to me, it felt kind of static. I'm sure I could have made it fun, but on the traditional stuff, I'm like, I just go to the gym. But then when I was forced to do something like this, I was like, wow, I'm just having fun in this machine. And I guess going back to your point, like innovation, that was the spark that got me into exercise in the first place. Because when I was younger, I was like, I was always into working out when I was in my teens. My wife's like, why don't you major in this? I'm like, I know everything. What else do I know about it? But which is stupid. But then when I discovered people, I had a mentor, and even the Paul Check stuff, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of stuff that's pretty crazy that I don't know anything about, and that's what interests me. And that goes back to like tools and devices. It's like if it's kind of the static stuff, I can get by with simplicity, and I don't always be training with all I have is a barbell and a dumbbell or whatever. But if there's other tools out there, that's what makes stuff fun, is that discovery. And I think even with this thing, it's still a driver. You kind of get sorry, a little phone call. You do kind of get used to anything. So even after a while, this was so new and discovering. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry, I'm going to have to edit this out. They're like blink you out because of the FaceTime call. Sorry. With this thing, I mean, that was like anything. I'm sorry, go back. With this tool, same thing. I think that after a while, using it 3+ years, was all pretty much doing resistance training. After a while, even that's like, okay, I want to try something else, or how can I put stuff on top of this? And now it's start blending things together. So I think with anything, eventually stuff will always kind of get maybe a little stagnant, but that's when you start incorporating and just adding more tools to your toolbox. And I don't know if you've experimented with that. Obviously, I know you got calisthenics and other things you're into, isometrics, how you kind of balance those things as well, just as far as sticking to your basics, but also adding and subtracting things here and there.
Yeah, I've always just kind of let myself gravitate towards what I feel is working best for me, what's giving me the best positive feedback, and what simply seems to be the easiest way for me to get what I want out of my training. And so if there's a device or a piece of equipment or an exercise, and suddenly I just wake up one day, I'm like, I haven't used that in quite a while. And I might revisit it a little bit, like, oh, I remember this was good. But sometimes I'll revisit it and think, yeah, I haven't used it in a while because it's not as good as something else that I'm using, or it's not quite as productive, in which case I feel fine about discarding it. It's like moving forward just physically. If you're walking forward, you're leaving things behind at the same time. And the more we think of gotta, carry everything in my past with me, the more you get loaded down and the less you can actually move forward. So I've always kind of had this kind of perspective of like, I'm bringing stuff in, but at the same time, what can I kind of not so much get rid of, but just leave behind? And even in my physical world here, like when people come over and they see my apartment stuff, they're like, gosh, it's so simple and so minimalist and everything. And it's like, well, I'm always kind of like thinking of what can I incorporate? What can I add in, to the gym? But at the same time, what can I kind of get rid of. Like I've got a client who's going to be leaving the gym next week, and I'm looking already at equipment that I've just got, and I'm like, well, what have I not used in a while? What have I got just hanging around collecting dust that I can give them as kind of like a parting gift? Be like, here, use this, keep up with your training. It's a way that I can give back to the world, because it doesn't do me any good just sitting here collecting dust. I don't have a whole lot of enjoyment. I used to be one of the collector type, where it's like I just want stuff around me all the time. Like I just want stuff. And now I'm like, why? Like it doesn't do me any good to just have these things around unless I like looking at it. But I don't typically like looking at a set of gymnastics rings on my shelf, So if it can go out into the world and be useful and productive for someone else, well, I see it as kind of almost a moral obligation to avail that opportunity to that individual, because it's not doing me any good, but it could be doing them a heck of a lot of benefit.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny, like stuff that I want to give away, people don't want. So it's just like I don't want that big thing. I rather I want something small. So you might have more stuff that you want to take, but people want to take. Well, I think even we touched on something that I'm sure this is a huge, gigantic theme of your channel and probably your books too. I know when we talked last time, the takeaway that was just summarize a lot of stuff that was ruminating in my brain. I'm sure you've already even talked this ad nauseum, was just how everything does work. Again, you can use any kind of tool. If you stick with it, you will get results. And I think that's something that I try to really instill in people in the questions, whatever it is I'm talking about. I'll just do stuff with the bands. Someone said, well, do you think you can really build muscle with that? Or do you think you can really build muscle with this thing, or just using a bar? I'm like, I think the variables are like, are you going to want to stick with it? Are you going to find it interesting? That'd be the kind of main thing. Do you have a foundation too? I think that's a big thing, is I think given the nature of everything, everyone wants to try stuff, the FOMO stuff, people aren't really giving themselves time to get used to something. So whenever I think of someone saying, well, that thing didn't work, or it's not going to work, 9 times out of 10, that same person has gone to the gym or is going to the gym is not getting the results they want either, which is probably because of mainly just consistency. But I think just that whole idea of just knowing that everything works. And I think now at this point in time, I'm so confident of that. Whereas I think before, especially even, it's not like I was that you need to go to the gym, but I'm just like, most of the tools are there. That's where the stuff I would like with most of you in a gym. Whereas now, like if everything was stolen, I just had the whatever pair of 50-pound adjustable dumbbells, I'm like, I could stick with this for a good 2 years or a year if I had to, and I'd be totally fine with it and be confident with that.
100%. I love this idea of, focusing on just the stuff that's working the best for you. Because there's that idea that, oh, you're missing out. But, my approach is always just looking at things of what is it doing on the fundamental level? What is it fundamentally doing to your body? And when you kind of look at it from that perspective, it's amazing how much stuff that's out there basically is just doing the same thing as everything else. It's like suspension curls, cable curls, machine curls. I'm bending my elbow against resistance in either case. It's fundamentally, they're all basically the same thing. So then once you recognize that, you're like, well, what do you just like? What just feels good to you? Like I do suspension curls largely because I just feel like it's more comfortable for me and it just hits my biceps better. That's the entire reason for it. And no, scientific studies or anything like that behind it. It just feels good. And so I think having more of that freedom of recognizing what things are doing on the fundamental level, and then you just pick and choose. It saves you from the FOMO, because you recognize it's like, okay, total gym versus bands versus free weights and stuff. Fundamentally, working the muscle against resistance, it's all roughly the same thing at the end of the day. So you can pick and choose whatever you like, whatever fits for you, and you don't have to have any guilt or anxiety about not doing something, because it's not really going to do anything different from what you're doing anyway.
Yeah. And I think what you bring to the table, or a trainer brings to the table, or just have the knowledge behind it. Because then when you say that, it's like, okay, well, that sounds pretty basic. I don't need a trainer. It is just simply bending my arms. But that's like saying, well, shooting a basketball is just, doing this, or golf swing is just like this. So it's like those things are definitely true, but that's where you need a talented, skilled trainer who actually know if they're making some sort of adjustment. That's why I say with exercises. I never say an exercise, well, that's a bad exercise. I would say I have a better thing, and hopefully I can justify why this is a better way of doing it. So I guess my point is, if you are just elbow flexion extension for bicep curls, tricep extensions, it is pretty basic. But even the basic stuff, actually a video today I was doing with looking at my friend who has one of these things. You will default, different tools have different mechanics, and your body kind of will respond a certain way. Even hanging on suspension trainers. That's a good example where like elbow flexion, you're doing this. But if I have a suspension trainer, the feedback from your body is telling you, well, I kind of think I'm hanging, going after proprioceptor, central nervous system. You kind of want to pull yourself into it. I don't really want to isolate my bicep. So when I usually use that experiment in class with students, we'll go over just simple elbow flexion extension. Like, okay, yeah, bicep curl, there's not rocket science. Well, it's not like rocket science, you're right. But let's put the suspension trainer up. This doesn't work all the time, but usually I'll have someone do that, and they'll just row it.
Right.
And I'm like, we just spent 30 minutes about all this flexion extension, right? Like, what's wrong? They're all drawing a blank. I'm like, what is he doing? I'm like, he's just turned a single joint to a multi-joint. So if you're the coach, how can we get him just to isolate the bicep? Just works on flexion extension. And I find the same thing in the gym. It's very basic stuff, but that's where a coach like yourself comes in to kind of give those subtleties where they do get more out of the simple stuff.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I use that a lot with hip extension work and stuff where, if someone's new to calisthenics, I'll have them lay down and their feet are up on a bench or a box and they're extending their hips up and everything. And I was like, okay, now are you pulling into your heels? And they'd be like, I guess my hamstrings are working. I guess this is, and then I'm like, okay, now let's put your feet on a suspension strap, or even I'll just hold their feet and pull back a little bit. I'm like, let's get rid of the box and let's give you something that's giving you some of that feedback on what you're really doing. And suddenly they're like, oh, wow, holy, like, wow, my hamstrings are on fire. I'm like, that's what what you want to be doing. So that feedback system is definitely a good consideration. Plus, getting just deeper into the technique itself. I'm still learning how to do bicep curls to a deeper level, how to engage all the other muscles associated with it, and scapular rotation and all how that fits into it and stuff. There's always a lot more you can learn about the most basic exercises. Absolutely. And different tools are easier to learn on for sure. When it's like, okay, like I'll give people different exercises that fundamentally it's the same thing, but I'll just keep like hunting and pecking. It's like, try this. And suddenly they're like, oh, wow, now I feel that in my chest. I'm like, okay, I don't know why that's working, but we're doing it that way.
Exactly.
That's working for some reason. We're going to figure that out. But it's like, no. Holy smokes. Yeah. Okay. Jackpot. That for some reason that works better. Go for it with that type of thing that you're using. And again, we wouldn't do all the other things that we did just yet. We'd stay focused on that one technique because it's working for some reason.
Yeah. And then sometimes it's just a matter of fear is not the right word, but they think they can't do something and immediately just disregard any kind of progress into trying something else different. Like, no, I can't do that. And well, even if you kind of degress them or regress them into something else, like you're already doing this. We're just doing different, switching the tool out. Like deadlifts are another example. Like you can deadlift the kettlebell with the same form, but put a barbell in front of it. Freaking I'm gonna kill myself. But just giving them, trying to lead them into permission to try different things. I hear that with a lot of stuff because of this nature of this machine. Like, well, I'm gravitating towards it because I have XY injury, which is understandable. This can handicap certain things, but I'm like, I never want to get the idea of like, you should, even though this stuff it's a very versatile machine, it's probably worth your benefit to kind of learn to maybe do a bodyweight squat or be able to pick up something off the ground. If in extreme situations, if that's not possible, I don't know. But I never want to give people a handicap. I know you're not saying the same thing either, to try new things if they're afraid of it or whatever. But.
Absolutely. That is definitely a sign of an advanced coach like yourself of like, okay, we may have not so much a physical limitation, but a mental or a emotional like hang up. And this is one of the things that I've long experienced with isometrics is I may get someone in the gym who has an aversion to strength training with something about the numerics of weight. You know, you give them a 5-pound dumbbell, they're good. 8-pound dumbbell, they're okay. 10-pound dumbbell, oh, I don't want to get big and bulky, you know, kind of thing. They've got an emotional aversion to numbers or something numeric. And so I might give them some isometrics and there's no numbers anymore. And they'll put like 5 times more force into their arms, you know, with isometrics than they would with weights, just because they're like, well, this isn't going to make me, you know, big and bulky. Then fundamentally, they're working their muscles 10 times harder. So it's just knowing like, oh, you've got this little aversion here. Okay, let's still get you what you need, working around that a little bit. And it's a creativity thing for sure. You got to have a lot of tools in your toolbox for it, so you can know what to apply to each application for sure.
It's scary too what people bring to the table based on one sentence they heard, or someone so and so said this. And I'm sure you see this all the time, just being on social media all the years I've been working and doing this stuff, that they're not going to try to. They just the case in point of like, well, you can't build muscle without a barbell. Or that's my biggest gripe, I think, with home gyms, is that obviously I love a barbell and I love a squat rack, 100%. I love it. But this default in their brain that if I got to build a home gym for resistance training, I have to have that, or it's not a home gym. It's not a resistance training gym unless I have those two things. Going back to what we talked about, of just like, you know, there's more, there's a zillion ways to skin a cat. Isometrics is another one I've heard people say. I was dabbling in that a little bit. And that maybe we can get into just like interest areas too, but that was some people are saying like isometrics, it hurts your back. I heard it hurts your back, and never do isometric holds, you know, because you're going to hurt yourself. I heard that like 3 different times. And you know, obviously there's a way you could hurt your back. There's certain ways you could hurt your back or anything. But I think I hear that so often of just these preconceived ideas of it could be a diet, it could be anything, and that's the biggest. I think maybe, I don't know if sad's the right word, it might be a little overly dramatic, but it is kind of sad when I see people say these things. I know where they're coming from. I hate to say it's ignorance to a certain extent, but I say that nicely. We're all ignorant to a certain extent of what we don't know about. But to make blanket statements, that's the stuff that I never really like too much.
It's just an ignorance of nuance, you know, which anybody starting out in an area is going to have, because the rhetoric that's so prevalent in our fitness industry and our culture is, if you do X, you're going to get result Y. And then they'll be like, because this person said, if I do this, I'm going to get this result, good or bad. Or, you know, look at this person, they've got this result and they do this thing, so therefore X equals Y. But there is always so much nuance to it that we're completely missing out on. So it's always like, well, if you do X, you maybe might sort of kind of possibly could get Y but all these other pieces that we're totally not mentioning also need to be considered as well. But when we're new at something like isometrics, if I just bring it up, it's like, well, someone said if I do X, I'm going to get Y. If I do isometrics, I'm going to hurt my back. They're like, possibly, yeah. I mean, nothing is foolproof against injury, but there's a million pieces you're missing in that conversation there. And as a result, you're kind of throwing the proverbial baby out with the bathwater, because it's like, could happen, but it could also make your back absolutely bulletproof if you know what you're doing. You know, it's like you could have the opposite effect too. And it's when you just totally discredit it or completely accept something like, if I do X, I get Y, so I have to do X. I'm like, not necessarily. It may not be a good fit for you for whatever reason. Then now we're getting into territory of either wholeheartedly adopting or discarding things based on that misconception of the methodological approach of X always equals Y, when it doesn't.
Yeah. And I wonder how you, maybe this question for you is how you balance. I was using isometrics pattern earlier when we were getting into it. That was something I'm pretty convinced it's awesome. I know it's awesome. I think I believed in it beforehand, and I got have fun with Isomax, IsoChain. Oh, this is really cool. Again, piqued my interest, and I think I kind of fell out of it because that was one of those things. Even though I know is awesome, I think that for sure I'd benefit from using it. I hadn't been using it as an example of I only got that 30 or 40 minutes, and I'm choosing things that might be a worse choice in the long run as far as goal wise, but it's the one I'm getting having the more fun out of. I'm just more engaged with doing. So making that kind of executive decision, either as a coach or personally, when you're looking at equipment, of course, there's a zillion things you could choose from. And I think sometimes people are saying, well, I want the objective best thing, or like even the program, give me the best program. And it's like, well, even if I gave you the best thing possible, doesn't mean you're actually going to do it. And what is, best is somewhat subjective. In other words, we can kind of nail it down. I always think of the stack lunch approach, or the people talk about diet stuff. Like, give me the $1 million diet, and one thing you could say, look, first just bring your. It's like the Mr. Miyagi stuff approach. We're basically saying, well, first just bring your own lunch to work, whatever. And it's like, I don't want that. Give me exactly what I should be eating. When really, if you can't pack your own lunch, and the packing your own lunch has a number of things, keeps you mindful, you're likely going to eat less. It has a number of cascade of effects that's probably going to help you. But if you can't stick to that one thing, writing a detailed program or anything else is going to be completely worthless. But I guess going back to, I guess I'm talking about adherence. And how do you bridge that gap of finding something like isometrics, which for me, what I'm getting at is like, I loved it. It's just, I found it, boring is not the right word. It's just, I can't fit it in. I probably could fit it in. I'm making excuses. You can coach me through that too. But how do you balance the idea of finding the tool that works for that person, but also something they're going to stick with?
Right. So again, with like the IsoMax or, you know, the WorldFit ISO trainer and stuff like that, super versatile tools, extremely versatile tools. I did the video program for Dragon Door for both the ISO chain and the IsoMax, and we've got loads of different exercises that I was demonstrating in those video courses. And the entire time I was going through that course, I'm like, I don't do any of these things. I do, in all honesty, I do like 3 or 4 isometric exercises with the IsoMax. Typically some squat variation, usually like their hack squat, which is awesome on that. Usually like a deadlift variation. I like a single leg deadlift with the IsoMax. And then usually something like an overhead press or something. And that's it, because I found that those were the exercises that I can get the most benefit from an isometric perspective. Now, I could do lat exercises, tricep and bicep and all these other sorts of things. But I find that for me personally, it's not really any different or more beneficial or creating anything unique compared to suspension curls or pull-ups and so forth. So for me, it's always like, well, what unique benefit am I getting from this tool? Like, I feel like I'm just getting something from this I'm not going to get somewhere else, or it's hitting me in some way. And usually for me with isometrics, I don't use it as a strength tool. I use it as a skill tool, a muscle engagement tool 9 times out of 10 of this is how we can get the entire posterior chain, or as I call it, the extension chain, working as a cohesive unit. Or this is how we can tighten our entire body with an overhead press. Because a lot of times when people do things standing, you know, I had a guy one time, he's always got shoulder issues and back issues and this and that and stuff. And I gave him the ISO chain. And I was like, okay, do a bicep curl. And he's like, what? Just a pull on it? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, okay. And he did that. And it just immediately gave us feedback on what his body was doing for applying force through it. But if he's doing a dumbbell curl and he's just, you know, it's happening so quick that all those misalignments and imbalances are just totally, you're not seeing them. They're there, but they're in such a small perception of time where the movement is so small that it's just not seen. But isometrics amplifies things. So I use it largely as an amplification assessment tool of, all right, let's see you deadlift. And they're just like, whoop, you know, and their shoulders just hunch right up like, bingo, there you go. And then when we get them into a good technique and they're balanced and stuff, and like my dude, and he's like, okay, I'm pulling. He's like, I feel like I'm barely putting any force into this handle. And I'm like, yeah, that's all your body can actually handle for strength training for like that approach. So he's like doing, you know, 50-pound dumbbell curls like this, and he's all wonky and worming and squirming and stuff. And it's like, no wonder your back and shoulder are always hurting. So we just did isometrics for a while of holding like that, and he brought his numbers up, but it was balancing him out. So I use isometrics as that assessment and balancing tool, and that's the almost as a warm-up in much of my calisthenics training. I start a lot of people with isometric stuff when I'm training them. Is we'll do these isometrics to get things firing, get things connected, get things working synergistically. Is there an imbalance somewhere? You know, if someone does an isometric lunge and they're immediately kind of wobbling around, it's like, okay, the hips are not on board today. We've got to really, you know, hold in a little bit. Then we know that's something to address, then we can go into things. So that's usually what I use isometrics for in that regard. And then sometimes if people are just like, I just can't feel my muscle engaged, like they're just having trouble engaging muscle, I'll go to isometrics every time because it's a hell of a lot easier to learn how to engage and improve that neuromuscular proficiency with isometrics than with dynamic training.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on a lot of key things there. One being, it's a good point to talk about. It's just the assessment tool capabilities of that thing. It's an unbelievable assessment, underrated assessment tool. I'm sure in the future that'll be more popular. As far as I was just thinking, like trainers in the gym, we all see the standard assessment tools that trainers will have in a gym, whatever, or what they learn on. I could see the Isomax IsoChain bar, I think, is so amazing when you think about. I mean, right away, it's just was looking at, everybody wants to grab that thing and see their numbers. But my kids, when they first started doing it, even the youngest, who was like now 3, wanted to grab it and see the numbers go up. I was like, everybody wants to touch that thing. So yeah, I think we also, the point is that posture. I didn't think about that, but that as an assessment tool, I think it's unbelievable. But I love what you said there, because you reminded me of going back full circle. We kind of started with of kind of giving yourself permission, and because this idea of kind of less is more mentality, that even when I got, again, same thing, got the Isomax, got the book just like a kid again, and going through the manual. I loved going through the pure like Dragon Door stuff. You know, you get really into learning stuff, and like I felt like I wanted to do all of it when it did default to eventually I think for me it was the curl, overhead press, bent over row. Those 3 were like the one I just liked doing. I kind of felt like, am I really doing it if I'm only just doing these 3? But yeah, just saying like, you know, it's probably better than not doing it at all, but just give myself permission of just sticking to foundations that fit into my schedule, what I like.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
you can have just a couple of exercises. Again, what I was saying about Dan Johnny's like, dude, you could just have a kettlebell and all you do with it are swings, and that's it. You know, when we have, like, I write my books and the video course and everything, we go in deep with a lot of different exercises just to ensure you have them in your back pocket of like, oh yeah, here's this lat exercise you can use with the Isomax to really engage your lats and work your back very well. Great. 99 out of 100 people are probably never going to use that exercise. But for the one person that really gets a lot of value out of that exercise, it's going to be a total game changer for them. And it's like, for that reason alone, it's in the course. So I guess what we're saying here, dear listener and watcher or reader or whatever, is don't be afraid to put stuff on the back burner. You don't need to do all of it. You don't need to do most of it, in fact. But you just need to do the stuff that you find you get the most benefit from. It's there, just like tools. Like I walk into Home Depot and there's tools for like adjusting, you know, the bands on a jigsaw and things like. I don't need these tools for anything. You know, I've got bike tools I haven't used in years, repairing my mountain bike and everything. But it's there in case I ever just need to replace the rear cassette on my wheel. It's there for that single purpose, and it's good to have it. But I'm certainly not pulling it out and putting it in my backpack every time I go mountain biking. No, I'm still using and carrying around my little multi-tool of just basically Allen wrenches and a chain tool, because 90% of everything I need to do on a mountain bike is just that. And it's the same with exercise, and it's the same with a lot of strategies. It's good to know it, kind of just keep it in your back pocket in case you need it, but it's always fine to say, yeah, I don't need to use that stuff right now, so I'm not going to, and that's perfectly fine.
Well, I think it goes back to your new book about, is it something with freedom, like being free, fit free, or something like that? Is there something like that? I saw
it coming out. Yep.
Yeah. And yep. I don't know for sure the title. I'm going off of, like, if you saw What Up Bob, baby steps. I'm just making it up, just the title. But I think it is, all we're talking about is being liberated from these rules of fitness that I think we all fall victim at some point, still fall victim to. I know I'm guilty of that too. But even at an early age, that was something that corrective exercise would be a giant one. This idea of, well, I think some people think you have to do all this extra stuff to, like, quote unquote, keep things in balance, or like, you know, I was obsessed with this idea of like, well, I got to work this thing, or I got to correct this one deviation or whatever, and that'll drive you insane. And I think a lot of health professionals use that in a predatory fashion to keep people locked in. But this idea of, like, yeah, just think back of people I know that were physically fit. And it goes back to supplements and everything. It's like they're pretty minimalistic. If you hyper freak out about something, you can make anything an issue. But yeah, the idea of just letting yourself go, realizing, yeah, you could just do a simple push pull. Don't worry about balancing out certain exercises or working that one head of the tricep versus another one. That was a big thing for me. And I think what you're saying too, that if I could pass on to anybody else, and I do try to say to everybody else, is sort of exercises, find a few things that work for you, whether it's 1, 2, 3 things, whether it's Mr. Machine or something else. If it works for you, just stick with that and just hit it on repeat. And I told people, even with this thing or anything, it's like, with this thing, literally goes to my brain is push, pull, arms, push, pull, arms. That's how, like, I'm going to be covering all my bases, working my legs that day. But I know if I'm doing those things, I'm having a great workout, I'm feeling the workout, I'm hitting things I want to hit, and everything's in quote unquote balance. I'm sure not perfectly, but it feels fine.
Totally. I have clients sometimes that are like, oh, I want to, go through your workouts. I want to do what you're doing. I'm like, you don't want to do what I'm doing. Partially because what I'm going to do is going to be kind of just out of alignment for you. It's like, okay, why are we doing this? I don't care about that. But the other thing too is they'd be like, that's it. We just blast through a few basic, things, and it's like, that was like 20 minutes. I'm like, yeah, we're done. And they're like, but that was all? It's like, yeah, that's it. That's it. Time to get back to work kind of thing. And they're like, oh, and they're often they've got that attitude of like, it's got to destroy me. It's got to wreck me. It's got to leave me, crawling out of the gym. And I was like, yeah, no, that's good enough for today. All right, moving on. And they would be disappointed with that type of training, because it's hard for people to get out of that, just that hustle mentality. I think that's another thing that really drives a lot of excessive nature in just life in general, but especially in our fitness culture, is this hustle culture that you've got to, if you're not doing everything to the max, to as much as you can, that you're leaving something on the table. And that's really pushing a lot of burnout and a lot of overdoing things, because like, if I've got even a little tiny bit of energy, I've got to use it up in the gym somehow. It's like, no, you can leave the gym feeling relatively fresh. You don't have to feel like you can't lift your arms up over your head in order to shampoo your hair.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, everything is, I don't think humans are meant to handle all this input that's coming in, whether it's exercise. Exercise should definitely not be something that stresses you out. And that's something else that goes back to just kind of, when I see some comments, it's like, this should not be, this is kind of, talking about who your favorite baseball team is type stuff. This shouldn't be stuff that freaks you out that much. Granted, yeah, exercise is definitely a needed stimulus for a lot of people, for sure, 100%, an important one, but I wouldn't let it freak you out. I just think with information, news, and everything, and we're hypocritical maybe because we're making content all the time. That's kind of what we have to do. Hate to be a part of that, but yeah, I just don't think we're meant to handle all this bandwidth. So anytime you keep something simple is always the best. But I think, yeah, we're trained to not look for simple things.
Yeah. I think the last point I want to make about this whole thing is, I feel like we're just too maxed out all the time. We're maxed out with how much attention we're spending. We're maxed out on how much money we're spending and energy we're spending. And we're just maxing everything out all the time in this kind of attempt to optimize and maximize and get as much as we can out of it. And it's just running us right into the ground, mentally, physically, emotionally, taxing our lifestyles. And then we wonder why we're always so broken and injured and stressed out all the time. And just backing off even just a little bit does so much for you in so many ways. And I think if there's anything that we can take away from this conversation, is give yourself permission to back off a little bit once in a while. And it's not about rest and recovery. It's just about living better and giving yourself the permission to not feel like you've got to go all out all the time.
Yeah. And I think we all know this too. I think deep down, everyone knows this. We just can't do it. I mean, I'm sure we're wrapping up and closing. And, one of the things that, whereas people get a hold of me, we were just talking about how, like, that's when I can't handle social media. I can't do it because I literally physically don't have the bandwidth with having kids, real work, real job, not the YouTube stuff I'm doing on the side, and I do other stuff with like my church I'm really involved with. So it's like mentally I can't handle any more inputs. And so I tell people just one-on-one, it's just like, yeah, don't let this stuff stress you out. Try and think. And even the program designs I make them so simple. They're meant to be conceptual based approaches. So the stuff I sell, it's like $5, or the free stuff they get if I get an update. It's meant to be super simplistic. It's get the concept down behind the basics and then just plug in what works for you. Obviously, if you want detailed information, you can get that. But my point is, I wouldn't tell you anything super complicated that I wouldn't do myself. So.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, the best programs are the ones that on paper you look at and you're like, oh, that doesn't look too bad. But then you go do it and you're like, oh, that was a challenge. that really worked me. You know,
Yeah.
And those are the best ones out there, the ones that don't seem too much. And then when you see the ones on paper, it's like, okay, if it's a third phase of the moon, make sure you're facing northwest for 3.2 seconds while doing these push-ups. It's like, oh my gosh, you way overthinking this one. It's like there's so many variables you can pull into this stuff, and most of them are really not that important here.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Any parting words of wisdom here, Mike?
No, I think people like you, just listen to people like you. I think don't overcomplicate things. I think if you like stuff being complicated, that's one thing. I would just say if you like stuff that's being complicated, and it is complicated, I would say just look in the mirror. If it's getting you where you want to go, that would be good. I think that's a big thing. I see a lot of people I'm not saying spinning their wheels, but I see a lot of people kind of set on dogmas, especially with home gym, home fitness, that they're all hitting this box, where you're just looking at a home gym, it's exactly the same. That makes sense to a certain extent, but everyone will I'm doing 5x5, or I'm doing this and that. My point is, yeah, for sure do that, build a foundation, but then don't be afraid to experiment with other things and find what works for you to keep your life a little more just simplistic. I think that's what we're getting on as a theme here.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time here, Mike. I really do appreciate it. Where can people reach out if they want to get more in touch with you or get some more information? I'll put links down below, of course, as always, but anything that you want to steer people towards some of your simple programs, perhaps.
Slaughtermanstrainer@gmail is a great email. I respond best to the YouTube stuff. Like I said, limited bandwidth. That's just the easiest for me to look at comments and respond to. I try to respond to everything, so that's probably one of the things that keeps me kind of maybe wired a little bit. So I try to respond to all of that stuff. Website's there. I'm trying to get a new website, but that's kind of old. But if you do want to get some free stuff, that's also data that's there. Just email or YouTube comment. Just got a question for me, let me know.
Great. Yeah, listener, watcher, reader, whatever. All that stuff is down below, so you can find out Mike's resources. I'll post a couple things too, as well, to like my micro workouts book and playlists and things like that. That can be a good place to begin. And yeah, if you have any thing that you need, we'll have contact information down below that you can ask us directly as well. Mikey, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure as always, my friend.
No, pleasure's all mine. Thank you, Matt.
All right, very good. And to everyone else out there, as always, I remind you to go out, lead by a strong example, and be fit and live free.